Hey, greetings everybody. It is GleeCon here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft as we continue our chronicles here. So we are now we're just continuing the aftermath of the War of the Ancients and the fallout from the Night Elf and involvement and near destruction. So this one's called the Exile of the High Elves, and the High Elves were basically the people most directly tied into Suramar and specifically Zinajari. If you remember from our book series, so they're the ones that were most tied into using the magic of the well, and I believe that they are the descendants of the Blood Elves. So this is 7,300 years before the Dark Portal. Really, it's over 2,000 years has passed now. We've done a big jump. They had the war with the satyrs and druidism and everything, and the sentinels are on the rise, and so 2,000 years down the line they finally part ways. So let's see how this goes. Stay a while and listen to this one. In the centuries after the Sundering, the surviving Highborn attempted to assimilate in the new Night Elf society, as we saw at the end of the War of the Ancients trilogy. Yet many of them struggled to do so. They found the temptation to delve into arcane magic irresistible, despite the strict laws banning sorcery. So that's something they don't touch on in the book, is that now arcane magic is banned, okay? Over time, these Highborn were warned again and again to stop meddling with the otherworldly powers. The penalty for repeat offenders was death. Despite this extreme punishment, the Highborn could not stop. The call of arcane energy was simply too strong to ignore. And I mean, it's part of them. It's what defined them. It's what gave them status. It's what gave them strength. It's understandable that they keep going back to the arcane magic. And it in itself is not inherently bad. But it's also what got Illidan imprisoned. A revered highborn elf named Dathramar Sunstrider chafed at the restrictions and punishments that weighed on his kind. You might remember him from he's the one that led the defectors from Ajara and is the reason why Tyrande was free. He eventually proclaimed that arcane power was the birthright of the highborn and that anyone who feared it was a coward. He and his followers began to practice the arcane arts without fear or restraint, daring the other night elves to act. For Dathramar and the other Highborn, using arcane magic was more than just an act of rebellion. They had always believed that Night Elves were destined for greatness. Though these Highborn did not wholly condone the evils of Ajara, they knew in their bones that Night Elf society could once again flourish into a mighty empire. Yet to do so, they would need to revive the study and use of arcane power. So they kind of want to basically go back to the glory of old. And again, I mean, you can see both sides. And you can also understand why they'd have a hard time totally becoming like the bottom of the cast when they were at the top. So it's not wholly good, but it's not wholly evil. The Highborn's reckless defiance was as sudden as it was startling. In the end, the other Night Elves could not bring themselves to sentence so many of their brothers and sisters to death. Yeah, that's probably their hope. Instead, they barred the Highborn from setting foot on Hyjal ever again. Dathramar and his followers were exiled, cut off from the Well of Eternity's energies. Well of Eternity. Yeah, so the one that they've remade up there, is that what it was originally called? I think the Well of Eternity was the other one, and they've just sort of moved it and recreated it at the top of Hyjal. Most of the Highborn happily accepted their banishment. They were finally free of the other Night Elves' constraints. Under Dathramar's guidance, the Highborn built a fleet of mighty ships. Then they set sail, leaving Kalimdor for whatever lands might lie beyond the churning maelstrom. The Highborn's determination was rewarded when they made landfall on a new continent some years later. This region, filled with lush wildlife and woodlands, would one day become known as the Eastern Kingdoms. Yeah, so they've got to be pretty much the first to bring that Kalimdor races over to the Eastern Kingdoms. Now, the trolls should be scattered at both, but other than that, and the Tauren, maybe. The Highborn traveled on foot for months before finally settling in a place marked by a strange silver hand, a land called Tirisfal, by tribes of primitive humans that inhabited the area. So now, this is our first mention of humans. We haven't even talked about them before now. Initially, these humans rarely interacted with the Highborn, yet as time passed, they began to tell legends of a brave, metal-skinned guardian named Tyr who had sacrificed himself to kill a monstrous foe in Tristful. This also explains why the humans and the Highborn, the elves that you see in Warcraft 2, are really, they're the first interracial allies on the Alliance side. So really, it's the Blood Elves that are their first allies. Indeed, the Highborn detected potent ley energies in the land, energies that the primitive humans could not detect. It was no well of eternity, but the lingering supernatural presence intrigued the experienced arcane practitioners. Some elves speculated that in time they could unlock its secrets and restore themselves to their former glory. They were desperate to succeed quickly. After being exiled from the Well of Eternity, the Highborn began to feel the effects of aging and disease. Their skin had even lost its violet hue, and they had begun to shrink in stature. The Highborn feared that the effects would only worsen over time. So they're physically becoming what we see, the High Elves and the Blood Elves. Led by Dathramar, the Highborn made a new life in Tristful Glades. For a time, they dwelled in peace and reveled in their independence, yet as they tapped into the area's latent magic, they found shades of dark energy. These shadowy powers drove some of the Highborn to madness. They began to argue that the humans had built their settlements atop the most potent ley lines in the region, therefore the Highborn should force them to relocate or even conquer the primitive beings outright. Dathramar did not agree. He had no wish to war against a people who posed no threat to his kind. The wise leader had also sensed the dark energies radiating from the land. He theorized that they might be responsible for the sudden rise of belligerence and madness that was afflicting the Highborn. Ultimately, Dathramar chose to lead his people away from Tristful to avert violence and spare them from further calamity. He decided that they would try to make a new home in the north. There, Dathramar's scouts had discovered a region rife with lush forests and powerful ley energies. Intent on reaching this land, the beleaguered Highborn struck out north and into the unknown. And we know that that's the Blood Elf homeland, Bloodmist Isle, as I think what it's called, in the north. Crud, I'm trying to remember what the name of that Blood Elf capital is. It's been so long. It's like a dead land now. No, unless you start as a Blood Elf and do a little bit in Sunstrider Square and stuff like that. It's those, and I think the Bloodlands are that buffer real main questing zone. Okay, and here's the Sunstrider dynasty. And we met, like I said, we talked a little bit about that when we were reading our novel, our last one, The Sundering. Dathramar Sunstrider hailed from a long line of illustrious Highborn, all of whom had served the Night Elf throne. Their namesake was something of an oddity among their moon-worshipping race. Dathramar's ancestor had chosen Sunstrider to symbolize their penchant for delving into the unknown, for breaking expectations, and throwing caution to the wind in their search for greatness. Like his bold progenitors, Dathramar carried on his tradition with pride. And it is his line that will lead the Blood Elves and will eventually, be found the Blood Elves instead of just the Highborn. And will be one of the chief villains of all time in both the Burning Legion and beyond. Even recently in Shadowlands, he plays a role. Okay. Another episode in the Pipes 5x5. Thank you, as always, for listening to my reading and my commentary. And I'll see you on the next episode of Lore of Warcraft.